All right, you guys with the bagels and the coffee. All right, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Inshallah ta'ala, today I'm hoping maybe 2 to 3 more sessions and we'll be done with Surat al-Baqarah. Inshallah, one way or the other we have to finish before Ramadan because that's our cutoff line. And so the section that we're on right now is section 3, the foundations of Imaratul Ard. And it focuses on 2 particular foundations. We said al-fikru wal-mal, intellect and wealth. You cannot build a civilization without both. Not one or the other, but both. They both have to be present in order for any of this to work. And we said that ultimately what Surah Al-Baqarah is trying to teach us is that this ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has a goal, and that goal is, like I said before so many times, Imaratul Ard, causing this earth to thrive and to cultivate this earth for the purposes of the Creator, not the purposes of man, in order to create a God-centric civilization. And we said that in this equation, man is the Khalifa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you are the one that receives the marching orders from Allah Azza wa Jal in order to do the work. He tells you what to do and you find ways to do it, so to speak. So there is a shared responsibility between us and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the ultimate execution of these commands. We talked a lot in section 3 about having the right type of ideas, the ideology that stands behind all of this, the fikr part of it. And then we started the conversation about mal, about wealth, a couple weeks ago. And one of the things that we've covered thus far was the conversation on riba. You cannot build a civilization without a robust financial system. And you cannot have a robust financial system that is based in exploitation of people. And so riba, which is the unnatural, impermissible growth of wealth that happens at the expense of others, is categorically prohibited in Islam. Some of the foundations of wealth and financial transactions in the Islamic tradition, we talked about this before. True ownership resides in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but short-term rights are respected. You're a tenant, but your rights of tenancy are respected. There has to be balance between individual and community demands or expectations. There is a blanket prohibition on riba, and solidarity between people is paramount, thus the constant repetition of the concept of zakah and sadaqah and so forth. So the Islamic financial system cannot stand on the right footing without this dichotomy of the prohibition of riba and the insistence on giving. And that's why zakah is not a choice, it's not charity. Zakah is a pillar of Islam, it's required. We also said that some of the qualities of our financial system is the avoidance of, when we talk about zakah in particular, the avoidance of man, which is boasting about what you've given to the person that you've given it to. Number 2, shaitan promises deprivation and poverty when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promises ease and relief. We spend either publicly or privately. In fact, as I said before, the scholars said there is not a single hadith in particular that says we are required to do it one way or the other. It's the intention that matters. And some of the scholars said that while zakah needs to be given privately, perhaps sadaqah needs to be given publicly. We've covered all of that. Be intentional. This is the last category. Be intentional in terms of who you give to and when. So don't just give your zakah and hope for the best. That is acceptable. It's permissible to do that, like you give it to the masjid or give it to an orphanage or whatever. You guys figure it out. Now the responsibility is on you. The better way of doing this is to identify people where with them your zakah is actually going to go a long way. Your sadaqah is going to go a long way. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught us, in the surah, يحسبهم الجاهل أغنياء من التعفف. There are some people that are, they have such dignity that because they refrain from asking, you think that they're wealthy, right? It is these people that deserve your zakah probably more than others. Young people who are trying to get married, but they don't have the financial means. Young people are trying to study, secular or sacred knowledge, supporting them and so forth, investing in and cultivating financial institutions and society that will help people, teach a man how to fish type situation. But be intentional in what you give and who you're giving it to. And then we talked about riba. When the Prophet ﷺ in the farewell sermon, he said, فَإِنَّ دِمَاءَكُمْ وَأَمْوَالَكُمْ وَأَعْرَاضَكُمْ حَرَامٌ عَلَيْكُمْ. Life, wealth, and dignity are inviolable. They are sacred. Okay? So if people's wealth is sacred, then Islam provides the proper guidelines, to protect and preserve wealth in the hands of people. Why is riba haram? Okay, we talked about many reasons. أخذ أموال الناس بالباطل. You basically take other people's wealth unjustifiably, not because of any effort that you have exerted on your own, which is how business works. I take risks, I put my money, I do my research, inshallah I will make money, but there is still risk that I might lose it. But when you deal with riba, you take people's wealth without effort on your own, and that basically makes it impermissible. Number two, يمنع الناس من الاشتغال بالمكاسب. It prevents people from engaging in actual effort of business and building, institutions and building companies and moving the economy, right? Because hey, I have money coming in, $10,000 coming of riba every month. Why should I work? Why should I do anything else? انقطاع المعروف بين الناس. It basically severs the ties and the bonds of kindness between people, because now we cannot lend anymore without, getting some return. Ja'far al-Sadiq ibn Muhammad, radiyallahu anhum, the descendant of the Prophet ﷺ, in his fiqh, he actually says that the reason riba is haram is to encourage people to lend each other without any riba, so that it cultivates kindness and love and ma'ruf between people. Number four, it worsens the disparities between sectors of society. So, the rich gets richer and the poor gets poorer, and we see that on full display in the riba-based society, unfortunately, such as ours, right? Number five, عدم المشاركة في المخاطرة. There is no sharing in the risk. The lender has very limited risk, while the borrower bears basically all the risk. All right. This is, by the way, one of the most essential reasons why the scholars, for example, consider modern insurance to be a form of riba, is because the insured delegates the risk to the insurer. Your insurance company takes all the risk, basically, whereas in your case, you have an accident, you're guaranteed, to get the money. But we'll talk about this, inshallah, when the time comes, because there's a lot of nuance about this. In the hadith, and again I want to repeat this one, اجتنبوا السبع الموبقات. Avoid the most calamitous sins, the most destructive sins, okay? And if we go back to the list, we've mentioned it last time, الشرك, right? To take gods alongside Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. السحر, to engage in sorcery. Or to frequent people who engage in sorcery. Or to try and attempt to cast a spell on someone, even if all of this is nonsense and is not real, which it kind of is. But even if it's someone makes the argument that sihr doesn't work, just engaging in this type of behavior would be one of the absolute most major of sins. Number four, riba, right? Dealing in usury. Number five, aklu mal al-yatim, to take the wealth of an orphan, wealth that is entrusted to you. التولي يوم الزحف, desertion on the day of battle. And قذف المحصنات, to accuse pure women of infidelity or lewd behavior. The Prophet ﷺ also said in the hadith, لعن الله آكل الربا وموكله وكاتبه وشاهديه. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala curses the one that profits from riba, and the person that has done the paperwork, for you, the person that you have delegated it to, and the witnesses therein. We also talked about the different types of riba, and that generated a lot of questions. The most commonly used type of riba in modern society is, and quite honestly at the Prophet's time even, is the riba nasi'ah. And this is the usury of extension. And nasi'ah min al-insa. Insa is to postpone, right? And we talked about ahlul nasi' last time, if you guys remember. So riba nasi'ah was the riba that Al-Abbas ibn Abdul Muttalib, the Prophet's uncle, used to practice in the days of Jahiliyyah, and he actually profited quite a bit. And in the farewell sermon, the Prophet ﷺ says, ألا وإن ربا الجاهلية موضوع عند قدمي وأبدأ بربا العباس. All the riba that was accumulated in the days of Jahiliyyah needs to be thrown on the ground. And I will start with the riba of my own uncle, Al-Abbas radiallahu anhu. Of course, he was not Muslim when he was practicing those things, before the prohibition came down. And of course, once you have cleansed your wealth, let's say that you've engaged in riba. And I mean, in this particular case, you are the one that profits from riba. If you are on the receiving end, you're the borrower, that's a different story. You get the short end of the stick. But if you are the lender and you actually benefit from riba, you cleanse your wealth from riba, you remove any of it, and you donate it, and you make tawbah, you make repentance. فَلَكُمْ رُؤُوسُ أَمْوَالِكُمْ لَا تَظْلِمُونَ وَلَا تُظْلَمُونَ. You keep the assets of everything that you owned from before. You wrong no one, and you are not wronged in the process. So what is riba nasi'ah? Riba nasi'ah is specifying a price for extending the term of a debt. All right? And this happens in many ways. It happens, for example, if I went to someone and I wanted to buy this pen, and it says this pen is $10. And so, okay, I'll pay you $5 today, and I'll pay you $5 next week because I don't have money. It's fine. And then when the time comes for payment, he says, I don't have $5. So I say, can I pay you back in a couple of weeks? And then he says, yeah, absolutely, as long as you pay me back $7, not $5. That is the very definition of riba nasi'ah. Or if you start off the transaction with the loan, right? So it's not a business transaction, it's not buying or selling, it's an actual loan from the get-go. So you go to someone and says, I want to borrow $1,000 from you, and then that person says, that's fine, when are you going to pay me back? I'll pay you back next year. Okay, fine, but you have to pay me back an extra 100. So you pay me back 1,100 instead of 1,000. That is, again, the very definition of riba nasi'ah. So you are basically paying $100 in order to buy yourself that extra time. All right? The other one that we also talked about is riba al-fadl. Riba al-fadl. And riba al-fadl, here, it's not, the benefit doesn't come from the extension. Rather, the riba al-fadl, the benefit comes from the surplus. Riba al-fadl as in the usury of surplus. And the Prophet ﷺ specified 6 categories. And in those 6 categories, you cannot exchange an item with an item that belongs to the same species. All right? ألا يبدل السلعة بسلعة من جنسها. In al-ahkam al-shar'iyya, in the language of Sharia, you are not supposed to exchange an item with another item, of a bigger amount from the same exact category or the same exact species. So, Bilal radiallahu anhu, for example, brought the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, really, really fresh, juicy dates from Khaybar. They're not majdool dates, but they were really good dates from Khaybar. And the Prophet ﷺ said, all of your dates are so good like this. This is amazing. Every time I ate dates from Khaybar, it was so good. And Bilal radiallahu anhu said, no, Messenger of God, I actually had, like maybe the equivalent of 2 pounds of a lower grade date. And I exchanged it for 1 pound of higher grade dates because I wanted to give you our best. And Rasulullah said, oh my God, this is the very definition of riba. I cannot eat from this. All right. So you take a smaller amount, you take a larger amount, and then you go give it to someone and then get a smaller amount of the same category, that is called riba al-fadl. We also talked about, so the 6 categories are basically gold, silver, wheat, barley, salt, and dates. Okay? Gold, silver, wheat, barley, salt, and dates. Now, you might say, well, this is only those 6 categories, nothing else? Like some of you asked a question last time, I think, about trading in cars and stuff like that. That is not included on this list. All right? So exchanging, 2 old horses for a younger horse, that is not included here, so it would be permissible. Exchanging, 2 Toyota Tercels for a BMW 5 Series, it'd be weird, but it's not included here. But the scholars say, and this is the vast majority, the scholars of the madhahib, they say that those 6 categories represent items in that same category. And so it's not just wheat and barley, according to the Malikis and the Hanafis and the Shafi'is and others. It's also rice, for example, which is not on the list, but it's also a grain, and because it's a grain, it should be treated the same way. And other such necessities of life. And so only the Zahiri madhab says that we stick with these 6, nothing else. But the majority of the scholars say those and other similar items. And so it makes this a little bit subjective, and that gets dicey, I think, sometimes. But of course, you can always refer back to the scholars of the madhahib and see whether or not, for example, exchanging, turmeric from last year's harvest, 1 pound or 2 pounds for 1 pound of this year's harvest. You're going to have to go into, the opinions in every particular madhab. I personally feel that the Prophet ﷺ selected these 6 because they're very important for the day-to-day usage of people. And so you have to ask yourself, if it's an item that is exchanged on a regular basis and you have to go to the grocery store on a regular basis to buy, then it would probably be included under this. But how often do you really buy a car or any other such items? So again, there is some subjectivity about this. Of course, we also said that, and this is one of the things I wanted to address today, inshallah ta'ala, whether interest-based transactions would fall under all of this or not. So, this is something that I will address just a little bit later. And we talked about the Nixon shock, 1971, and the decoupling of fiat currency from gold standard, and how that completely changed the economics of the world. And it is based on that particular event that Islamic institutions such as Al-Azhar, for example, they do not assume that the rules of riba apply to modern day loans and lending and stuff like that, which again is something for us to discuss, inshallah, together. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and we covered this one as well, الَّذِينَ يَأْكُلُونَ الرِّبَا يَقُومُونَ كَالَّذِي يَتَخَبَّطُهُ الشَّيْطَانُ مِنَ الْمَسِّ. Those who allow themselves to profit from riba, they operate every day like someone who has been has received a casting spell from shaitan, walking like an intoxicated person, intoxicated emotionally, intoxicated mentally, perhaps even intoxicated physically. People who deal with riba are always, worried. They're always scared. They're always looking for opportunities. They're always looking to increase interest rates. There's always this frantic nature, about dealing with this transaction. But the scholars also said that it applies also to the afterlife. It applies to resurrection. That with all the horrors of the day of judgment, you will identify people who have dealt with riba because they will be walking around like they're drunk, right? According to many of the scholars of tafsir. One of the arguments that the people of Quraysh used was, that إِنَّمَا الْبَيْعُ مِثْلُ الرِّبَى. At the end of the day, buying and selling looks exactly like riba. Why is this haram and why is the other one halal, right? Which is not a weak argument when you think about it, because at the end of the day, let's go to riba al-fadl, for example. If one of the sisters, takes her necklace from 5 years ago, 18 karat gold, and its value is $2,000, and then she takes that to the jewelry store, and she exchanged it for a newer 18-karat gold necklace, but its value is, its market value is $500. That would be considered what? This is riba according to our definition here. However, let's say that she went to the jewelry store and she sold the jewelry store her necklace for $500 and then took another $500 out of her pocket and then bought the other one. Is that riba or not? No, this is perfectly halal. Literally, at the end product is the same. I have less $500 in my pocket and I have a newer piece of jewelry in my purse. Right? Well, not me personally, but the sister that is running the transaction, because this thing is recorded. And so the end result is the same, yet one of them is halal and the other one is haram. Okay? And of course, we can go on and on and on and explain why. We know exactly why, buying and selling, because when you think about it, if that sister decided to sell and take the $500 and walk, the jewelry store can't do anything. Oh, you know what? I changed my mind. I'm just going to sell it and I'll take my money and I'll buy something else. It gives that type of freedom in a buying and selling type of transaction. Whereas when I exchange, I am bound to take that product and I am bound to exchange the same amount but at a higher price. And that puts me at a disadvantage. But when I sell it, I have made my money and then I can decide what I want to do. Maybe I'll change my mind, which is not available in the riba transaction. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not even address that. He does not provide the logical explanation, although the logical explanation is detailed as we study the Quran. But here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responds by making one statement. Oh, you know what the difference is? وَأَحَلَّ اللَّهُ الْبَيْعَ وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَى. Allah made one halal and He made one haram, and that should be enough. That should be enough. You cannot say, I'm spiritual, I serve God, I give in charity, I volunteer with Doctors Without Borders, therefore I don't need to pray the 5 times because I'm really close to God anyway. Can you say that? You can't say that. Because we are bound by the law. We are bound by what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has dictated. That is your ibadah. Your act of worship is to surrender. That's the very essence of Islam itself. And so you can't just make up your own rules. You know what? Lamb is halal and pork is haram. You can go on and on and on and on about, telling us how, there is worms and there is disease and, the pig is the youth, whatever. People come up with their own arguments about this stuff. If you raised both animals in your backyard and you fed them well, they will both be healthy to consume in moderate amounts. But one of them is halal and the other one is haram. There is an act of surrender to the authority of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as we manage these things. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you, أَحَلَّ اللَّهُ الْبَيْعَ. Allah has made buying and selling halal, وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَى. And He has made riba haram, and that should suffice. The most astounding thing to me is that this is 1400 years ago. The Quran is detailing the philosophy and logic of complex financial transactions 1400 years ago. Islamic scholars had detailed laws. Oh my God! Like if you look at the laws, maybe like in the year 300 or 400 after Hijrah, right, when the state was established and there's institutions and so forth, the code of the law is so detailed. It would take Europe another 1,000 years to codify all of this, right? The details of transactions and how to protect the seller and how to protect the buyer and consumer protections and the check that gets written in Iraq and gets cashed in Morocco. All of these financial instruments, including fiat currency, by the way, all of that was well established in the Muslim world about 1,200 years ago. And only recently, maybe the last 100 years, that these concepts are developed in the Western world, right? Besides, aside from that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in ayah 276, He says, يَمْحَقُ اللَّهُ الرِّبَى. يَمْحَقُ اللَّهُ الرِّبَى. Allah will crush riba. He will crush its benefits. He will crush its barakah. He will wipe it out. And we see this. We see this, at a macroeconomics level. We see it at a microeconomics level. I can't tell you how many people I know personally in our Muslim community that have dealt with this, especially in the real estate field. And they would come up with all these, crazy concepts. They would go buy, a warehouse for, let's say, $2 million. And then they would open escrow. Right? They didn't pay anything. They would open escrow. And they don't have the $2 million, right? But they would go and find another buyer that would pay $3 million for it. And then they would open escrow at the same time. Now that person could have made $1 million in that transaction without paying a single penny. But how could you possibly do that? Because there's no end to human greed. So they would go and borrow against the property. And then they get some type of an appraisal company to appraise this at, let's say, $4.5 million. And then they would borrow to the maximum amount available. And then they would take that money, pay this guy and pay that guy, and then take the $2 million out of thin air and then go repeat the same process in another property. They keep doing this year after year after year, and the asset keeps growing in the tens of millions of dollars when they have not done anything, right? Except just manipulation, right? What eventually happens to people like this? One way or the other, you're going to make one mistake, and that mistake is going to cost you everything. I have seen brothers, wallahi, I can give you their names, first and last. I can give you their driver's license number, right? I know them, okay? They kept doing this, tens of millions of dollars, a couple $100 million worth of assets, right? And 5 years later, they lost their home. They were about to become homeless. From extreme wealth to extreme, like literally on the brink of homelessness. In a span of 5 years. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, يَمْحَقُ اللَّهُ الرِّبَى. Any growth that comes out of this instrument will be crushed, will be obliterated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. Right? يَمْحَقُ اللَّهُ الرِّبَى وَيُرْبِي الصَّدَقَاتِ. And He will let your charity grow in the most clean and the most beautiful way. So what you're after really is not the quantitative growth of your wealth. What you're after is the qualitative barakah that comes to your life. That should be the goal. The goal is not the monetary amount of how much I made, although we still work as hard as possible to increase our wealth the halal way. There's nothing wrong with that. But what I really want is comprehensive khair in my life. I don't want to have millions of dollars in the bank and then have a divorce. I don't want to have hundreds of millions of dollars in the bank and then lose my kids. I don't want to have hundreds of millions of dollars in the bank and have cancer. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us, right? I don't want to have hundreds of millions of dollars in the bank and then go to hellfire. I don't want to have hundreds of millions of dollars in the bank and I'm not able to get any sleep. What you really want is a comprehensive quality of life. Of course, that includes some financial security, right? But I want everything else. This is not the only thing that I'm after. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, yes, it will grow through riba. In fact, the word riba itself means growth. It will grow through riba, but I will crush it. Meaning, either I will slash the asset or destroy the asset itself, or I will destroy the value of this wealth in your entire life. You will get nothing. You will get no happiness out of this. You will get no joy. You will get no satisfaction. You will become like a beast, constantly running the forest, looking for feed. The more you get, the hungrier you become. And this is, again, is no way to live. In 268, not 268, 278. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وذروا ما بقي من الربا. O you who believe, fear God and abandon whatever that remains of all of your riba transactions. Give it up. Okay? Give it up. Make tawbah right now. Now, what happens if I didn't? Nowhere else in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes this threat. Nowhere else. And this threat is significantly, substantially worse than the threat of throwing you in hellfire. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَإِن لَمْ تَفْعَلُوا فَأْذَنُوا بِحَرْبٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. This is the shocking convulsions of God's threat. If you do not abandon riba, be told, be informed that you will have to endure war declared on you from Allah and His Messenger. Allah says, I will proclaim war on you. I will declare war on you. You can't even handle your neighbor declaring war on you. If your neighbor made your life miserable, if your neighbor is constantly inviting people and is having a lot of noise, they're making it difficult to sleep. If your neighbor has animals in the backyard, if your neighbor encroaches on your fence, if your neighbor sues you, your life will be absolutely miserable. You will literally, a lot of people, if they have bad neighbors, what do? It's easier to do what? Just move. Move. It doesn't matter if it's my fault or his fault, just move. There's no point in fighting. Now I want you to imagine the US government declared war on you. With the tanks and the MiGs and the F-16s, coming to attack your house. You stand absolutely no chance. Yeah, you go ahead and invoke your gun rights, and what's that going to do? Right? You have a couple of weapons. You're going to open fire on tanks. That's not going to work. You will be obliterated. Now imagine the Creator of heavens and earth declares war on you. And you know what? This is not just about being physically flattened. Okay? This is about knowing that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala declared war on you, you stand no chance on the day of judgment. You stand no chance. Because God has singled you out. You're no common sinner anymore. You've been singled out. This is not a crime of passion. This is not zina. This is not lying. It's not even murder. These are crimes of passion. Right? You're in the moment, you do something haram. Okay, understandable. I'll accept your repentance. But you calculate, and then you harm yourself. You harm society in the process. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I will not let this one go. I will declare war on you. Sayyid Qutb in the shade of the Quran, has really extensive analysis of what it means for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to declare war. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from that. فَأْذَنُوا بِحَرْبٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. Let it be known that you have brought upon yourself a war from Allah and His Messenger. 281. وَاتَّقُوا يَوْمًا تُرْجَعُونَ فِيهِ إِلَى اللَّهِ. Fear that one day on which you will have to return to God. You will return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala one day, and you will be held to account on that day. Jazakallah khair. Appreciate it. واتقوا يوما ترجعون فيه إلى الله ثم توفى كل نفس ما كسبت وهم لا يظلمون. Be conscious of that day on which you shall be brought back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whereupon every human being shall be repaid in full for what he has earned, and none shall be wronged. Allah says, no one will experience any dhulm with me. There will be no injustice. You will get exactly what you deserve. You will get exactly what's been coming for you. You will get exactly your proper recompense. وَاتَّقُوا يَوْمًا تُرْجَعُونَ فِيهِ إِلَى اللَّهِ. I wonder sometimes, in the course of my work, I have to meet so many people that suddenly their life changed because of an event. Like sometimes those events are so earth-shattering. Someone who's perfectly healthy, for example, goes to the gym regularly, eats organic food, avoids stress, has a really simple job, amazing family, good deen, comes to the masjid regularly in his early 40s. MashaAllah, looks like this guy he's going to be Jimmy Carter, right? Looks like he's going to be 100-some before he leaves the world. Boom, 42 years old, gets diagnosed with the rarest type of cancer. The rarest type of cancer. Completely throws his life to complete disarray. And then everything in his life and his family's life and his kids' life now revolves around hospital visits, doctors, chemotherapy, this and that, life expectancy. That's all they think about. I need to buy myself another year, 2 years. And then all of a sudden the conversation becomes about wills and trusts and what's going to happen to my kids and this and that. I need to buy a lot, at the Muslim cemetery. That's all they're thinking about. From my life is good and where are we going to go next year for vacation to I need to buy my plot at the cemetery because it might happen any moment. I see this every single day. I see people who, Ramadan is coming, mashallah, around the corner. I see people that used to be with us last Ramadan, perfectly healthy, and I've attended their janazas. They will not be with us this Ramadan. Allah did not answer their dua, Allahumma ballighna Ramadan. But they did not reach Ramadan, right? These things happen so quickly. I've seen families, brothers in the community who made honest mistakes, without nothing malicious. They make a small mistake on their taxes. And then the IRS comes after them with the might and power and ruthlessness of the United States federal government, crushing everything in its wake in order to go after this brother's assets, obliterating everything in their life. They have to start from scratch, possibly even face prison time on minor offenses. Just it rubbed the agent the wrong way, and you meet some quota assessment. We need to put 2 more people in jail before the end of the year. It just happens to be you. Go ahead, litigate and sue and do whatever you want. It'll be 5 years of pain out of your life. These things just happen so quickly. And the point is, I'm not saying that we should be upset and depressed and anticipate these horrific events to happen. What I'm saying is that it's not worth it. It's not worth it to engage in something haram just because of how lucrative it is. It is not worth it to open a business that has a shade of gray in it. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. Life is very short anyway. Something happens. What kind of price are you willing to pay? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will He will excise the barakah out of your life. What kind of price are you willing to pay? Are you willing to pay the price of your own family? Are you willing to pay the price of your own marriage, the price of your own children? You have all the money in the world, but your kids are off the path completely, on drugs, joining gangs. Will it be worth it then? I've seen people who made so much wealth, but then they're spending the money. Wallahi, there's this particular brother, every couple of months he has to get his kid out of jail. Hundreds of thousands of dollars are spent on legal fees. Hundreds of thousands of dollars are spent on, just closing lawsuits and stuff like that, and paying the money off the court in order to avoid, jail time for their kids. Hundreds of thousands of dollars spent on rehabilitation facilities because their kids have, multiple drug addictions. They once in a while they have to go pick up their son from some alley, in downtown, sleeping on the street like homeless because they're so nuked in the head. That's no price to pay. That's no price to pay. It's okay to be moderate in your means and be thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I will grow my wealth. If there's an opportunity to grow my wealth the halal way, but I'm going to scrutinize every single aspect of it because you know what? At the end of the day, it absolutely is not worth it. Now there's a couple of remaining questions, inshallah, that I need to address on this conversation before we get into ayatul dayn that comes right after, and the ethics and the rules of business transactions in general. All right. What are the modern transactions that are considered to be included under riba? Because I think this is more important, for us. This is a Tafseerah al-Quran. So, we don't have enough time, obviously, to get into the fiqh of things. So, if you want to ask me fiqh questions about every single detail, Tafseerah is probably not the right platform for this. We can always talk about it later, but I'm just doing tafsir. Right? So, but, since we are on the conversation of riba, then we have to emphasize modern things, because there's very few people today that will tell you, oh, here's $1,000, but give it to me next week, $1,100. That's not very common. The instrument that we use today, for that type of growth is called what? Loan. Loan. And how do we make money on loans? By applying what? By applying an interest rate, right? So there's an interest rate that goes on the loan, all right? The vast majority of modern scholars, the vast majority of modern scholars, I mean a significant vast majority, like 95%, they would say that conventional lending, conventional bank transactions that involve interest today are the definition of riba, right? The vast majority. So, you know, if you go and basically, if you go and, for instance, borrow money from the bank in order to buy a car, right? I don't have $25,000, but I need a car. How do I buy my car? I'm going to go borrow from the bank, and you know, I'll borrow at 8-9%, whatever, in order to buy my car. This is an interest-based transaction. According to the vast majority of the scholars, this would be haram, because it would be considered riba. All right. Now, there's caveats to this, and of course, this is not the time to talk about it. There's caveats for this, and the most important caveat is that number one, if you are buying the product from the lender, or if the lending comes from the seller, you know, this is called, you know, bay'ul ajal, and this is halal. So let's say that, you know, the car is $25,000 if I bought it cash. But if I bought this car by interest and they calculated the interest, your total amount after maybe 36 months would be $30,000, right? Now, can the seller of that car impose the price at $30,000 and divide it up over 36 months? Yes, that would be perfectly halal. There's nothing wrong with this, because there's no loan involved. This is just a facilitation of payment, and he can dictate whichever price he wants to dictate. It's up to you. You don't want the price, go buy it from somebody else. All right? Number two, so this also applies to home ownership. There is a category of real estate that is called, you know, ROIs, real estate owned, right? Or REOs, whatever it is. REOs, yes, real estate owned. So if someone borrowed from the bank, you know, had a mortgage, and then that person was not able to pay the mortgage for one reason or the other, the house was foreclosed, and then it was repossessed by the bank, right? That is called real estate owned by the bank. Why do they call it REIs? Because the bank is not supposed to be holding real estate. The bank is a financial institution. Their job is to, you have cash. But because you did not pay your mortgage, the bank repossessed your property, and now the bank owns that property, right? And the bank is stuck with it. Now, if I go to Bank of America that has an REI, and I say to Bank of America, I want to buy this house for $500,000, so yeah, sure, you know, you can buy it now for $500,000 cash, or if you would like for this to be like over 30 years, it's going to cost you $900,000, and this is going to be your monthly payment. Is that halal or haram? According to most modern scholars, they would say that this particular transaction is halal because the seller and the lender are the same entity. It's not third-party lending. All right? With details and caveats about this, you have to be careful, you know, the type of wording in the contract and stuff like that. You know, there's all kinds of things. Number three, one of the caveats that you also have to keep in mind is that, and this applies mostly to the Islamic financial institutions. And you know, we've had a conversation Friday night about this particular point, you know, among many other points. But we had a conversation about the Muslim financial institutions, and the fact that what they do, and this is what I heard from so many people, what they do is that they take the conventional mortgage application, they play with it, they adjust the wording, but at the end of the day, they're still selling the loan to Freddie Mac or Fannie Mae or whatever. And one of the things that we need to know is that what concerns me is the transaction that I'm engaged with. What the other person does with their money is not my problem. The Prophet ﷺ, if you remember the story, before he died, he had a shield that was loaned with a Jewish man. And Rasulullah, you know, basically took money from this man, and he gave him his shield, and he said, keep my shield until I pay you back, right? It's called rahn, right? What's the modern word for this? Right? This is like when you go to those pawn shops, right? In general, pawning an item is halal, but then there is also some caveats to that if we have time, I might consider. Right? So the Prophet ﷺ did business with the Jews, and the Jews ultimately did what with the money? They did a lot of riba with their money, right? They did a lot of riba with their money. Was that the Prophet Muhammad's problem, sallallahu alaihi wasallam? That was not his issue. Okay, what they do in the back end with their wealth, that's their problem. They have to deal with it, and I'm just concerned with the transaction that I am dealing with. So you have to be careful with these things and not spoil the process for so many other people who are trying to do halal and they're trying to support Islamic financial institutions. Oh, it's all the same. It's all going into the same pot. It's not for you to say. And that is, by the way, like one of our speakers emphasized, is probably not true. There are lending institutions that do not sell mortgages to the stock exchange or to Fannie Mae or whatever. They have different models, so you should not be making generalizations about this. Number 4, there is debates between the scholars, about whether or not what makes it halal is fixing the percentage or floating the percentage of return. So you will find some scholars, for example, Sheikh Tantawi, Sheikh Al-Azhar, from about 20 years ago, his position was fixing the interest rate. So I told you before, Azhar's position is that conventional lending is halal, right? That is the position. It has been the position of the Azharis since the 1970s. Like I said, once currency was decoupled from the gold standard, they're like, it's just a piece of paper, It's not. It has nothing to do with riba as we understand it in fiqh. I disagree with this personally, right? But in the interest of honesty, I have to share with you what everyone else says. All of what I'm saying right now is in the 5%. Remember, 95% would consider all of this to be haram. Just don't deal with it. But in that 5%, there is different shades, right? And this one, they basically say what makes it halal is, that you have to float the interest rate. Or Sheikh Tantawi actually says what makes it halal is that you have to fix the interest rate, because this is how you protect people's money, right? Aside from that. Number 5, Sheikh Qaradawi borrows a Hanafi opinion that if one article of the contract is void, that does not make the entire contract void. And so your contract with the bank involves interest, but that does not make the entire contract corrupt. And if you are buying this for your primary residence, then they issued a fatwa that this would be halal in that particular instance, because you need this to put a roof over your head and your children and so forth, right? So again, I'm scratching the surface. I'm sharing with you some multitude of opinions within the 5% that believe, okay, not in every case that interest would be riba, therefore it would be haram. But again, 95% of Islamic scholarship, ancient and new, they would say that it is all haram. Insurance. This is something else that I wanted to maybe touch upon. All right. In general, Western forms of insurance would be considered haram. In general. All right. And I will qualify that statement in a second. But why is Western forms of insurance considered haram? Number 1, it's considered to be bay'ul gharar, right? It's a form of selling that involves deception, right? More often than not, insurance companies are trying to get out of their responsibility. They're trying not to pay you for the damages. They are trying to find fault in the claim. Sometimes they reject claims altogether, right? And we've all had issues with insurance companies in that particular regard. Number 2, it makes you personally a murabi. You might be benefiting from riba because I pay the insurance company $50 a month. I have an accident next month, I get $25,000. All right? So I bought $25,000 for $50, and that would put you in a position of riba in accordance with this particular perspective. Number 3, it would be considered a form of gambling, because there is a lot of speculative nature to modern insurance practices. Because really what insurance companies hope for is that as few people as possible will actually make claims, and that I'm collecting money from everyone, and that maybe only 5% will make claims, and I'm making money from everyone else. But sometimes there's an earthquake. The LA fires. I'm wondering what they're going to do with all the houses and all the claims. And now they started adding clauses like fire is not included, or you have to have separate insurance for fire. But even if all that community, if all of them carried fire insurance, well, now, because their insurance companies were hoping that no such event would take place, now that it did, now they have to pay money to all of these people, possibly even go bankrupt, and so on and so forth. Now, there is a form of insurance that is halal. And one of the things that we really need to be focused on as a Muslim community, perhaps, is to cultivate or reignite that form of insurance, which is the takaful policies. And takaful is solidarity. Remember, like in good old times, 25 families would come together, and then they would create a pool, and each family will put maybe like $50 a month. If one of us gets sick and needs doctors or hospital fees or whatever, then that person gets the money and it's paid. Now, that person still has to keep making those payments every single month, right? Now, there is no profitability about this. There is no speculation. You're getting exactly what you're getting. Even if you got sick next month and you only paid $50 and you're getting $5,000, but you will continue to make those payments after you have been released from the hospital. So that would make it halal. And with life insurance, I think there are Islamic institutions in the US now that are trying to develop takaful life insurance policies. Hopefully, inshallah ta'ala, this will grow. Other forms of riba that we deal with today is government bonds and CDs and things like that. All of that has tremendous speculative nature and in general should be avoided. Question: is stock considered riba? Why not? Because in stock I'm buying what? You're buying ownership in a company, right? This is a publicly traded company. They have a portfolio. You can go to their website. You know exactly what they're buying and what they're selling. It's like me buying a grocery store for $1.5 million, right? I know exactly. I looked at the books. I know their inventory. I know what they're buying. I know what they're selling, and it's all halal, and I liked it, right? So engaging in the stock market is not haram because of its riba. It could be haram if the product that you're buying is haram. So you have to be careful what you're investing in. And that's why they've developed all these portfolios, ETFs, whatever, that are clean. The Mormons do it, some conservative Jews do it, and definitely the Muslims. And there's still possibilities, sometimes remote, but there's still a possibility that there is taint in your income, and that's why you have to keep giving sadaqah. But I did not engage in this knowing in advance that there's anything about it that would be haram, right? So you have to be very careful where I'm investing in. Now, what about stock options? What happens in an option? Any of you had done options before? Right? Say again? Yes. Again, I have not seen any disagreements on option, by the way. I have not seen any scholar that has dissented from this. The view is that options are haram, right? Because options have a very, very clear speculative natures. It literally, when you approach the options, you know that you're gambling. You know exactly that you're gambling. Now, some scholars have qualified the statement. They made an exception to calls, for example, because you already own the stock. Again, these are details, but I personally just would rather avoid options. I'm going to do covered calls and this and that. Just, in my opinion, just stay away from it. Buy and sell stock and know your rights, responsibilities, know your zakah calculation and all of this, and keep it halal, keep it clean. All right. Again, credit sales are halal. Monthly installments. So if you go buy a TV, from Best Buy, and it's $2,000, 0% interest, and is it costing him $2,000? Probably not. Like if you buy it cash, it'll be $1,500, but you have to pay that extra because you are financing 0% financing over 2 years. That is halal, right? Now, after this discussion on riba, which is such a pioneering discussion in the Quran, right? SubhanAllah, only in modern times that we are realizing more and more the impact of riba on society, on economy, on income disparity, and so forth. But after this really deep discussion on riba, Surat al-Baqarah takes us into another conversation on the regulation of wealth. It covers business transactions, it covers debts, it covers contracts. The detail of this is just absolutely beautiful, inspiring, astounding, right? And remember, this is happening only, about 2 years after Hijrah. I mean, Surah Al-Baqarah was mostly revealed in the first 2 years. Some of it still came later, almost all the way through year 9. But the bulk of Surah Al-Baqarah was revealed in the first 2 years, right? And so in the first 2 years, these complex conversations about financial transactions are being shared with a community that is not super sophisticated. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to set the tone. It's halal to accumulate wealth, but there are guidelines, there are restrictions, if you want to do that the halal way, right? The foundations of building a nation was all embedded in those 2 years. Political, economic, social, cultural, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. You want to build a nation? Build it right. Do it right. Do it clean. Do it beautifully, right? The rules that are meant to last beyond the lifetime of one person. If the Prophet ﷺ was an imposter, why is he worried about any of this? He's just a king. He wants wealth. He wants obedience. He wants money. He's already in his 60s. He knows he's not going to live much longer. Why would he create these complex rules, about nations and economics and transactions? Let them have riba. Let them enjoy it. In fact, I'm going to make a rule. I get 15% of every transaction. If he's an imposter, that's what kings did. That's what absolute monarchs did. All he wanted was the taxes. Give me my share. You can do whatever you want. I just want my share. Right? To this day, that's what governments do. They don't mind that you deal in drugs or bribes or any other illegal activities. You don't mind it as long as they got to get their cut. Right? One of the jokes that my dad used to say, because my dad ran trucks in Egypt when we were kids, and so sometimes the government would create such difficult impositions on the type of goods that you are transporting, right? And so they would, for example, because government people wanted to control the import-export of sugar, for example. In a country of 100 million people, sugar is really important, okay? So they don't want private citizens to be transporting sugar, right? That is imported from, from any country. They just want government-sanctioned businesses who have paid so many bribes to the government to be the ones that have exclusive monopoly on the market. So what does my dad do? He still runs sugar, but he runs it against the law. Because this is the one thing that makes so much money. And he has to survive. So he would say to us, so I'd be like, I was a little kid and I hear these stories, I'm really 10. And I'm sitting at my dad's office, at his company, and he's having these really scary conversations on the phone. And I was like, Dad, are you sure? Do you want to be doing this? I mean, what if it gets confiscated? This is way too much money to be lost. And he says, confiscated? What are you talking about? They don't want to confiscate it. They want to create difficult conditions so that people break the law, and in order to get out of it, you have to do what? You have to pay a bribe. That's it. It's not about losing 50 tons worth of sugar. It's about how much you're going to pay the officer just to get away with it. Entire systems that are based on this type of corruption. And if you live in those systems, you better attempt to survive. And of course, my dad was not running, heroin either, because you have to draw the line somewhere between what is halal and what is haram. But what is legal and what is illegal often depends on who's in power and who's dictating the rules and who has authority and so forth. But the point is, people in power, what they really want at the end of the day is not the betterment of society, it's not the health of people. What they really want is, wait a second, you're going to build your house on your land using your money without paying us a little bit? That doesn't make any sense. And they have to charge you what? Like a substantial percentage of construction cost in this corrupt state of ours goes into fees and permits. It is us, the government, bestowing on you our blessings. You can go ahead and build. That's what you're paying $150,000 for. It's the most ridiculous thing. And now, people are catching up to this and they're finding workarounds, right? The Chinese now develop these lines of ready-made prefabricated houses. So all you need to do is to basically put your concrete slab, you pour your concrete, and then one container has all the pieces. It's a 2-day job. Nuts and bolts, and then you have a house. Now, is this required? Are you required to take a permit for this? You don't need to get a permit for this. And I have seen now a lot of people, including brothers in the community, in rural areas, who are building, these prefabricated houses because it literally costs you like $50,000. The same square footage would cost you about $700,000 to build, and it's cost you $50 if you do it prefabricated. Okay, think about that. If you guys have any land, right? And you better start doing this sooner than later, because you know what's going to happen eventually. They're going to change the laws and they're going to find a way to still tax you. All right? It has nothing to do with your safety. All right? But the Prophet ﷺ shares with us in the Quran these timeless rules. It has nothing to do with his own self-interest. In fact, the man died so poor that he had a shield pawned out to a Jewish man. These rules did not improve his life in any tangible way, alayhi salatu wassalam, because they were divine rules. It had nothing to do with him. He may have not even understood the complexity of all of these financial details himself, but he was the vehicle through which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala articulated to humanity the rules that are supposed to stay timelessly with us to this day. These rules are supposed to continue to inspire us and guide the way that we do business. But I want to end with this notion, okay? Have you ever read, how many of you did any legal studies before for any purpose? Like, some of us have read, a book about the law. Maybe you studied a little bit at school. Maybe you've done some research, for a lawsuit that you're involved with, whatever it is, okay? If you've done any legal research, if you go on Wikipedia and read, the code of any law, what is the most striking feature about it is that it's what? The language is usually what? The language is just difficult to understand. It's super tedious. The language is very, very tedious, usually. Ugh. Only attorneys can handle this stuff. But the rest of us, oh my God, what is this? So annoying. And you have to read it so many times in order to understand. It never happened before that complex legal codification is articulated with such eloquence. Like if you read, ayah, I think number 282, the ayah that details business transactions and debts and so forth. How is it possible that someone can talk about tedious, legal, business-related things with such eloquence, with such beauty, right? When the time comes, inshallah ta'ala, and we cover this ayah, probably do it next time, I just want you to pay attention to how beautiful the articulation is, to how powerful and poetic the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are, just communicating something that should have been very, very tedious, but communicated in the most beautiful, beautiful way. Last point the Islamic legislative analysis in those financial transactions that we've read in Surat al-Baqarah, and the details by which all of this is weaved, is absolutely pioneering. I mean, you're talking about a world that did not have financial institutions per se. There were no banks at the time. There was no organized lending. The idea of documenting business transactions and having shuhud and having government institutions, where those notary and all of that did not exist at the time. The very terminology of these ayat on business transactions continues to be used today, in the Muslim world, right? The word check in Arabic comes from which, in English, comes from which word? Comes from the word sak in Arabic. Sak is a permission to pay, right? And so there is a pioneering nature about all of this, and we continue to benefit so greatly from this. This is 1,000 years or 1,200 years, after the codification of all of these laws, or 1,400 years after the revelation of the Quran itself. How pioneering, is this effort? All these incredible rules detailed in Surah al-Baqarah. Western financial literature is probably like only about 100, 150 years old, right? Yeah, I can't remember off the top of my head, the first bank, for example, but it wasn't that long ago. Yet you had Muslims, based on the language of the Quran, dealing with these things, and it was made a legal reality in the Muslim world that, if you have a financial dispute, you literally go to the qadi, you have to go to the courthouse, and then you lodge a claim, and then you are assigned a date for your hearing, and then there is an initial hearing where you present your case to the judge, and then the judge tells you what is needed for you to prove your case, and then the defendant is invited to the court, summoned to the court. Again, no one goes to jail yet. All of it is resolved away from penalties and away from punishment. If you can get it done away from punishment, that would be the job of the courthouse of the qadi was to handle those disputes away from the punishment. If we can get it done without punishing anyone, without the application of the penal code, that was their job. The job of modern day judges is not to resolve disputes, but rather to determine who's going to go to jail and will be making very cheap Snickers, right? And license plates, and to join the prison industrial complex, and to be a modern day slave. That's the job of judges today. It's not to resolve disputes. And you've heard this so many times. If you have enough money and resources to hire really good attorneys, there is very, very, very few crimes in this country that you would be accused of. But if you are one of those unfortunate people and you have to get some public defender, you're totally doomed, right? Now, in our ancient times, in the pre-modern era, when all of these laws and rules and regulations were so alive and well, and they were being practiced constantly in the Muslim world, it was a completely different story. I'll probably stop here, inshallah, and I'll take some of your questions, and we will finish at 1, inshallah, in order to get ready for Salatul Dhuhr. The kids will come invade the space in about 15 minutes. Actually, yeah, in about 14 minutes, inshallah. So I'll take some of your questions, and then we'll conclude for today.
So, simple question, like if you are going to be hired by a company and they offer you stock options, then
the scholars have addressed this, and they've also addressed compensation that comes in the form of life insurance policies or any other types of insurance, right? And the general rule of thumb is that whatever comes from your employer as a form of compensation, that perhaps you should accept it, because you are not the one that have initiated the transaction. This is not this is just part of what. Of course, if the employer gives whiskey bottles, we're not going to take those, right? But when it comes to options and life insurance premiums, if your employer is paying for all of that, it's okay to take it. Yes.
Where does the concept of darura play into this? Because a lot of this, in this current system, there's a lot like your car has to have some form of minimal liability insurance. Is a physician looking at a hospital, they mandate yada yada yada. Is this considered the darura? And if everything
Yes, I appreciate that question. Obviously, perhaps I forgot to mention that when I talked about insurance, but obviously, not we don't have, not every form of insurance in this country is voluntary. If you are pulled over and you don't have proper coverage on your car, at least maintaining the minimum requirements, you will be in legal trouble. And so this definitely would be considered darura, that you have to carry auto insurance, for example. You need to have some form of health insurance, otherwise, your medical needs are going to be skyrocket in cost. I mean, it's already very expensive. You pay like $1,500 a month. I remember when I was much younger, for the entire family, we were paying like $200. Now, your premiums have skyrocketed because the cost of healthcare has also skyrocketed, and so that would be considered definitely darura. At least those two, and everything else is negotiable. Everything else, then we have to kind of talk to our scholars and see if they issue a fatwa, or not. As a masjid, for example, we cannot do business without carrying some type of coverage. Like, there's very few things that we'll be able to do. Every single time you have to work with a vendor, you have to organize an event, you have to rent a facility, or reserve a banquet hall, or any of this. First thing that they ask, show us a copy of your insurance. And so we cannot afford to do that either. So these are cases where forms of insurance would be considered darura. It would be considered necessity, just because of the system and the circumstances under which you live. So anything that is a surplus of that needs to be assessed on a case-by-case basis, and you have to talk to the scholars and see if it would be considered darura or not. Yes.
So buying life insurance, I know some policies they say are not wrong and some are. How about life insurance when you're purchasing?
So, in general, the rule of thumb is that life insurance policies are considered to be haram, in general, right? Now, there are exceptions to that, and those exceptions are decided based on the language of the policy, and these are small cases, okay? Term, for example. So here's one of the things where darura also comes in. Let's say that you are a family of limited financial means, all right? And in a Muslim society, there is a takaful process, there's a solidarity process, there is fardul kifaya. Society will find a way to bury the deceased, and it will nearly cost the family nothing. But in this society, they will put a lien on your car. And so if I know that my wife doesn't work, and I'm on limited income, I don't have any savings, and my kids, they have their own expenses and so forth, and there is, if something happened to me, there's burial fees and stuff like that. Many scholars have said that in a situation like this, that creates a necessity in which you have a term insurance policy, and that term insurance policy is sufficient to cover all of those expenses. Maybe my wife is going to find a job, but it might take her 6 months. So there has to be enough income coming to the family for those 6 months, and enough to cover the burial process and the plot and all of that. Some scholars would say that in that particular situation, get the bare minimum that would cover that, because this would also be a darura. And so that should not be treated as a habit, like it's something normal and we can just go ahead and do it, without any qualification. So you have to be careful what is considered a necessity and what is not. Any other questions? All right, jazakallah khair, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. إن شاء الله we'll see you guys next Sunday. جزاك الله خير. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.